You are listening to the Intelligent Racer Podcast, where we look to educate and entertain the endurance racing community through discussions with racing professionals and elite age groupers.
In today's episode, I once again speak to Jeff Browning. I enjoyed our last conversation so much and had so many more questions still to ask, he agreed to do another interview. Today, we discuss his coaching approach and philosophy, how he balances the demands of being an ultra runner with his family and work obligations, and finally, he shares an adventure with us through Southeast Oregon. I think you'll find it interesting. Well, Jeff, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I'm happy to be back.
So why don't we start off with talking about your coaching philosophy? So last time we talked, we got a little bit into how you race and some of the interesting races you've done and some of the kind of ways you approach training and cross-training. But when you're dealing with other athletes, I mean, what's your approach there? What's your philosophy in terms of getting people ready to do races, especially people with not as much base as you have?
I think the biggest thing for me, one thing I introduced right away is strength training. And so, some of my athletes that come on for coaching already doing some kind of strength training, but definitely pushing my athletes to do, 2 sessions a week of functional strength training. I have things they can do if they don't already have their own regimen. But I usually start in a base phase right away with just getting consistently running. If they've already been running and we've already got a base, then that's great. But if they don't, we start with base phase and we introduce the stress of strength training. I think, building a good foundation so we don't get injured is important. And so that's my first thing I start with. And I'm big fan of Arthur Lydiard's philosophy. So, introducing stuff periodization and phase training. So we start out by base training, running, and getting strength training in there, and then getting in the habit of stretching and some foam rolling, very, very short and sessions, but making sure that becomes kind of a routine, and getting that into your routine. And then I usually start introducing hills first. I like to get my athletes running hills regularly, or if they live in a flat locale, and they have access to a treadmill and a gym or something, then we start introducing some treadmill sessions with hill climbing. As Max King, he said to me a lot of times is, hill work is speed work in disguise. So that was a big Arthur Lydiard philosophy. It was building strength before they built speed. And so I think building strength through hill work is a great way to kind of keep people from getting injured. And getting used to, if we're training for ultra marathons or trail races or even if it's half marathon trail races, there's going to be a lot more climbing in it than a typical road race. So, we want to get our legs used to going uphill and downhill. So, that's another one. And then, then the other stuff is just typical, speed work here and there. And, I do a lot of stuff by time just because I personally prefer part of what I like about training for ultra marathons and trail and shorter. I do shorter stuff too, shorter trail races. One of the things I like to do is just run on dirt and run, and the beauty of GPS watches is we don't necessarily have to be stuck at a track or on a treadmill. We can just go cruise through a grassy park, or we can cruise, a combination of roads and trails in the town, or on, finding our own routes and getting creative. So I encourage my athletes to get creative with their routes and use time-based, if we're doing intervals or something like that, once we introduce them later, they're doing them by time. And I think that's, it just makes it way more interesting. Then you can go run a loop, or you can run a cool route and really kind of get I think we get a big, huge benefit as humans just to be in nature and try to find something natural. So even if you live in a city, I recommend going to a park or going somewhere where you can get a little bit of taste of nature and get out of the concrete jungle, and because it's good for our soul. So I think that's a huge piece for me, and as part of my coaching philosophy is to make this training fun. It shouldn't be hard work, but we're going to use like solid training philosophies and that will help you improve and hopefully be injury free, and but also have fun doing it.
Right. And I know there's no easy answer to this. And we just talked about, time versus mileage. But let's just say someone is, I don't know, has a decent base, has been doing marathons for a number of years. And there's no, again, I know there's every athlete's different. But what would you, suggest in terms of, or what would you, from a coaching perspective, suggest for a ramp up of mileage to, first of all, from a race perspective, probably, would you say before you do a 100-miler, you probably should do a 50-miler or 50K, but also just from a weekly mileage perspective, they're used to doing, 20, 30, maybe 40 miles a week, or, however we want to translate that into hours. But how do you go about ramping them up slowly and surely to make sure they're not injured and just trying to build that base for someone who hasn't done an ultra before?
Well, I think the biggest thing is 50K training is not that much different than marathon training. So besides doing your long runs and a couple of, maybe another run a week on trails that, so you're used to that kind of running. What's safe is probably 10 to 15% of volume per week. So if we look at our total volume of running in 1 week window, each week, we don't really want to bump that up more than 10%. So if we're bumping up our long run, then our maintenance runs need to stay about the same. If we're keeping our long run consistent from week to week, time-wise, then we need to probably maybe bump one of those maintenance runs up by a little bit, 10 or 15 minutes. So that's kind of how I do it. I ebb and flow long runs. I usually give my athletes, an easy week every third week. They get kind of a lull in intensity, and that allows them to recover from the 2 weeks of buildup we've been doing. And because I think that's just healthy and intelligent. Otherwise, if you keep digging someone into a hole each week in, week out, eventually they're either going to get burned out, injured, or sick. So you definitely want to be strategic in how you train them. And everyone's different. Some people are just have muscle imbalances and they get injured really easily. You knock them up 5% and they get injured. So some people need a good base phase of not very big volume before they can handle the volume. So, everybody's a puzzle piece, and I have to approach each person individually and what their background is. But if someone's been running pretty consistently without injury for 2 or 3 years or a year, it's pretty easy to get them ready for a 50-miler or a 100-miler within a 6-month window. So, a 6-month block of coaching will get them ready, get them to a start line of a 50 or 100K or a 100-miler if they have that good base of running, some experience running without injury.
Would you say it's prudent to do a 50-miler before doing a 100-miler?
I think to do it intelligently and with the least chance of injury, then you would want to run a 50-miler or a 100K before you run a 100-miler, and preferably quite a few 50Ks, just to get the experience of aid stations and how to organize drop bags and aid stations. That's the beauty of 50-milers and 100Ks is you have to be able to use. You're going to at least use one drop bag somewhere, so you're kind of getting used to using that. You're getting used to logistics. The what a 150-miler and 100-miler or 100K are a lot like a 100-miler as far as aid stations go and race organization. You just add the whole night factor with a 100-miler, and that last 40 miles hurts like crazy.
Yeah.
So I think preparing ahead of time as much as you can and getting those under your belt is really smart. And that's what I did before I did my first 100. I did probably 4, I think, 50Ks, a 50-miler, and a 100K before I did my first 100-miler. So that was a year and a half of training before I stepped on the line of my first 100. So, of running ultras. So I think a full season of doing shorter distance ultras before you would, commit to, say, a summer 100, 18 months out from your first 50K. If you really want to do 100, then that's the way to do it. But that's also, you have to think about it in terms of your running background too, like we just previously were talking about. Right. It really depends on, are you a newbie and you have never really run consistently, or you've only done 20 or 30 minute runs 3 days a week? Then we have to build a base first and get you running consistently for 4 to 6 days a week. We can even for people who get injured or coming from a different background, you can train 4 days a week of running and make it to the start line of a 100-miler and finish a 100-miler. But you're going to have to cross train a couple of days a week doing something else endurance wise, whether that's cycling or, Nordic skiing or something. You're going to have to do something else to make up that extra volume.
Right. Have you coached or spoken to anyone who's come from, like, say, a triathlon background where, they may run 2 to 3 days a week, but they have a pretty significant base overall in terms of cardio and using their legs because they're cycling hundreds of miles a week and that type of thing? I mean, have you seen them transition over to ultras and, what the challenges there? I mean, they obviously have a solid endurance base, but it's not so focused into one specific sport.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've had a couple of athletes who are cyclists who have come over to make this transition into ultras, and I did the same kind of transition. So,
right.
One of the things we look at right away is a quad to hamstring muscle imbalance. If there's an imbalance there, then they're going to have some knee tracking issues, and so we want to make sure that that's taken care of. So that's what we're going to kind of focus on strength. With our strength days is making sure that those, the quad is 1.5 times stronger than the hamstring. But so we don't have knee issues, but, you can make that transition. And it just depends. I mean, this is a hard one because everyone's so individual that I have to take everyone on an individual basis when I'm training, giving them custom training. I mean, if I look at my training weeks of all my athletes, they're all so different in how I train them weekly, and they all have different schedules and responsibilities. So it's a hard one to answer, but the short answer is yes, you can make that transition. If you're having any kind of major, if you've been ramped with injuries on and off trying to run, just by getting custom coaching is not necessarily going to fix it right away, but we might be able to at least help you pinpoint the situation and start working on a fix. It may take 4 to 8 weeks to get it fixed, but we should be at you training consistently. But before you can step up to a 100K or 100-miler, you got to be able to run consistently without any setbacks. You can't go run 4 or 5 weeks and then be like, oh, my knee's bothering me again, and then have to take 4 weeks easy, and you're not going to make it to the start. Well, you could try it, but you're not going to have fun. You're going to be destroyed after the race.
Yeah, it's going to be a death march.
Yeah, it's going to be a death march, and you're going to have a setback after the race, and you're not going to come back that fast. So right. It's really almost is not worth doing it. It's better to back off on your volume and your goals, and say let's run some 50Ks consistently. And once we've got 3 50Ks consistently with recovery afterwards, back training consistently, run another 50K, a little time off, recovery, training consistently, and then run another 50K, and all those go smoothly, then you're ready to start training for a 100-miler. That's the one thing I like about 100-milers is that you cannot just show up off the couch to the start line because you won't make it to the finish line.
Yeah,
you can't cheat it. There's no cheating. There's no shortcuts. You got to do the work, and it's got to be 6 months. It's got to be 6 months worth of work leading up to it, of consistent work without setbacks. And I think that's what's the beauty of this sport. Especially being 100-miler being the pinnacle of the sport. When people who want to say, I want to run a 100-miler, it's kind of what people are saying is the new marathon, but you can't cheat it, man. You can't cheat it. And that's why I like it. It's hard.
Yeah. It's really cool. So talking about all this training, you mentioned last time when we spoke in the last episode that, you focus your miles and you do a lot of hill work because you have a limited amount of time. So maybe you could just speak a little bit more about how you balance all the demands in your life. So you're at the, highest levels, you're an elite athlete, you have a family, you have kids, and you have a job. So do you have any other kind of ways of balancing? You obviously said last time found that the hill work helps a lot because you're not having, I guess, junk miles, I would say. You're trying to maximize and make the miles the, most effective, most productive possible. Anything else you do in terms of training or anything to help with that balance?
Well, the biggest thing with balance, for me at least, I mean, having my own businesses, that helps because I do have a semi-flexible schedule. I mean, I have to put in the work, as far as making money and putting in the time to do the work. I have a typical work. I definitely work more than 40 hours a week. But I do work. Sometimes I'm working on the weekend, and sometimes I'm working a lot of nights. Because I have that flexible schedule, I can take a little more time at certain times of the day. So I can take, I take Fridays as my long run days, so I don't break into the weekends with the family. So I do a long run on those days, and then, I'll do shorter, lunch runs during the week, and I can take a longer lunch, so that helps. So I do have a semi-flexible schedule. So there is that caveat I'd throw out there. But balancing it, I do a lot of stuff where, I might run, a lunch one, and if I had to cut it short that day because of work, after my kids are in bed, I'll go back out for a 45-minute easy run with a headlamp, and get another run in. Or I make sure I do the work. And, I run pretty much every day except maybe one day a week off. And sometimes I don't even take a day off. I might take an easy run with my son or something, like 2 or 3 mile jaunt instead of a day off, where we're running, 10 or 11, 12-minute pace and just chatting. So, I try to run plenty of easy work with hard work.
Well, I guess one thing you mentioned, though, is your son runs with you a little bit. So I guess that's kind of helpful when you have family members who are also doing the sport, because you actually can spend some quality time with them while working out, right? I mean, obviously, you're not doing all your workouts with your son, but being able to spend a little bit of time with him doing your passion has got to help, right?
Yeah, that helps. And my wife, when it's winter right now, so she doesn't really run in the winter. She does indoor stuff, but she runs a little bit, 20, 30-minute runs, when the weather's nice. So, if I'm going to go out for a lunch run, I might say, hey, you want to go with me while I'm warming up? And so we'll do the first 20, 30 minutes together, make a loop back by the house, drop her off, and then I'll go out and do a normal run. So I'll run that first. I'm going to warm up anyway, really, really easy. So for me, being able to run with my wife for 20 minutes and just catch up and say, hey, in the middle of the day, that helps, so, the little things, but if you ask my wife, she would say, and I just recently asked her this question because she was like, even when our kids were little, she goes, I never noticed you were running a ton because you're doing it such odd hours that I didn't notice. So I would do it on my lunch when I was working, or I would be up before everyone else was up in the mornings. Or I would do night runs after everyone was in bed. So there'd been times, back when we had small kids, there'd be times when I'd be out running at 10:30 at night during the middle of the week. I'd go do an hour run at 10:30 to 11:45, and then I'd be back and shower and be in bed by midnight. So, it just depends on where you're at too, as a family. My kids are getting older now. My youngest is 5, my oldest is 14. So, my 14-year-old can watch the kids now, watch the younger kids when my wife and I can step out for a 20-minute run, or something, or step out for a date, which is awesome. But in the early years, I was just, there's times when I missed a little sleep, which isn't not always good, but, the older I get, the more I concentrate on sleep, and I'd rather run, 2 miles less on a training run and get more sleep than I would, push that extra 20, 30 minutes of a run at night and then miss a little bit of sleep.
Yeah, I mean, sleep is so valuable. It's one of the keys to recovery. So speaking of your son, I saw a picture you put on, I think it was Twitter or something recently, where you were fast packing with him through the mountains. So for those not familiar, can you just sort of explain what fast packing is, and maybe is it a helpful training tool for people who are going to do mountain ultras and kind of do trail running?
Oh yeah, man, absolutely. The great thing about fast packing is I did some, my early days before I got into ultra running, I did some backpacking, and that's with, big old heavy packs. And then you got to wear big old heavy boots. And, the beauty of like ultra running kind of opened this up to me was going lighter and faster. And I think the beauty of fast packing and the gear has gotten so good that you can literally just, I think our base pack without water and food were both for both of us was around 10 pounds. So, and that's with less, I had an old setup and I kind of invested in some lighter gear this year with us going to go on this. We did a trip in the Wallowas in Eagle Cap Wilderness in northeastern Oregon. And, the beauty is that you can cover a decent amount of ground. We did 15 miles a day with pretty light packs, but we had a shelter, like we had a full tent. So if it did rain, we were okay. And we had a stove. So we had, we did go a little minimal on some things, but for the most part, it was pretty enjoyable. And it's awesome because you're not like trudging with your head down under a giant, pack. So, and it is a great cross trainer. I mean, you're power hiking everything. So, we didn't run at all. We just hiked everything, but we could hike pretty fast. And we did like stuff in really lightweight, race vests. So we dropped our packs a few times and went and summited a couple of little peaks, that were on the route. So we would just drop our packs and do an out and back up to the peak and then come back down, shoulder our packs and head to our campsite for the night.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And you're already in running gear, in running shoes. With that light of a pack, you don't need heavy shoes. So, we're just running ultra lone peaks and it was awesome, man. I mean, it really kind of opened my eyes. This year was the first year I'd really kind of concentrate on going really light with that type of style, with my son being old enough to kind of keep up and us like actually cover some decent amount of ground every day. And I didn't know going into it, man, if he was going to be able to handle 15 miles a day, but he was fine. Like every day he was pushing the pace. Like he was like, yeah, let's keep going, because a couple of days I was like, we could just go like 5 miles today and just stop. And he was like, no, let's keep going. So, yeah, it was cool. It was definitely a really cool experience to share with him.
Cool. So why don't we end our discussion today with a few more of your adventures? Because I know I really enjoy hearing about them. So one of the things I was reading on your blog, I believe, was I think it was Southeast Oregon, and you did a multi-day kind of run and I guess trek through the wilderness there. And could you just talk about that a little bit? Because I know for people not familiar with that area of the country or world, what is it like there? How remote was it? And can you just walk us through a little bit of what you encountered?
Sure. Yeah. So Jesse Haynes and I went through, we did a supported run through the Oahe Canyonlands, which there's a new kind of concept in Oregon called the Oregon Desert Trail. It's not actually a trail. There's a few single track sections, but it's an 800-mile through trail that is GPS waypoints. So it's tons of bushwhacking cross country in the desert. It starts in just east of Bend and does a big horseshoe down through southern Oregon and southeastern Oregon and down by the Nevada border, and then back up like through the Steens Mountains, and then back up through and ends at Oahe Lake State Park on the Idaho border in Oregon. And anyone who's not familiar with Oregon, most of the state of Oregon is a desert. Most people see, all the population lives on the green, lush side of the Cascades on the west side, but 2/3 or almost 3/4 of the state is arid desert. So the whole eastern side of the Cascades. So it's a huge, very like minimally populated part of the state. So this is one of the most remote sections. It's the biggest unimproved unimproved area in the lower 48. So meaning it has some double track, really old rough double track up on the rim. It's a big swath of 3 forks of the Oahe River come together and go into a giant canyon that eventually dump into the Snake River and going into Idaho. So we started at kind of not quite the headwaters on the Oregon Desert Trail. So following these GPS waypoints, the part we were going to do was the last 172 miles of the ODT. And we only had a 4-day window to do it in. We had a team with us because we're trying to bring some attention to it because we feel like it needs some protection. It's just BLM land right now.
Yeah.
And we'd like to see it be protected. What it would do is solidify grazing rights for the current grazing rights there. So it wouldn't get rid of grazing rights. There's definitely some misinformation out there. So it still would it would solidify grazing rights for all the ranching that's still going on there, but it would also give it some protection to keep it being sold off or to keep it from some of the mining pressure that's going on there right now. And so what we wanted to do is just basically show it on foot through video and photography. So we had a videographer and a photographer with us, and we had one guy doing logistics. So he was basically moving our base camp. For us to be able to pull it off in 4 days, he was moving our base camp to our new rendezvous point every day. So he's doing a lot of four-wheel driving. And anyway, all of them are ultra runners that were with me. So even the film crew and the driver was an ultra runner. So everyone understood what we were getting into. So Jesse and I basically, we were trying to run about 40 miles a day, and we ended up only going 29 miles the first day because it was so gnarly. I mean, it was bushwhacking in the willows and crossing the stream probably 300 or 400 times. It was down in a slot canyon.
Wow.
So we were just following the stream bed. There were rattlesnakes. And so it's just really, really, basically what it is a giant crack in the earth. You're in this high desert of, bitter brush and sagebrush, and it's just rolling. And then you drive there's only one highway that bisects the entire region. And we drove on these 30 miles on really gnarly 4-wheel drive roads to get to the edge of it, to drop into it. And you couldn't even see it until you're right on it. So it's all of a sudden, it's just this crack opens up in the earth. And so we started following that. We had to swim the river on day 2. It's pretty gnarly. It's normally 200 CFS, cubic feet per second. We'd had some serious spring weather, and it was 2,000 CFS.
Oh, wow.
So, it was just shorts and shoes and dry bags, put everything in a dry bag and huck into the water and swim across. It was all up in the willows, and it's muddy and really flowing fast. So we had to do that, and we, following our GPS the whole time. And then we kind of ran into a big storm on day 3 because we did 29 miles the first day. We did 48 miles, I think, 47 or 48 miles the second day into the night, finished at 10:30 at night. Got up the next morning. We're running by 8:30. And that day we were supposed to go 40-some miles and rendezvous with the team. And we got into about 37 miles into that day. And we'd been watching the storm approach from all day, kind of from the south. And we were hoping it would bypass us to the south. But it did this swirl and kind of came back at us. And right when we were rendezvousing with the team, about 5 or 6, 7 miles from where we were going to camp, there was this really pretty place called Iron Point that overlooks the giant canyon of the Oahe Canyon. And we were wanting to take some photos in this really cool area right in the evening when the light was really good. And we come running in there, and we took a few photos, and it just unleashed hail and pouring down rain. We all bailed into climbed into the truck, and we're sitting there talking about it because you got to remember it's a roadless area. So it's just really, really overgrown, rough double track. And all the roads turn into mud, like peanut butter.
Yeah.
And so if it rains, you got to get out. So if you have a vehicle. So with a support like that, we were just trying to go light and fast every day to be able to cover that kind of mileage off road. It's not like running trail. Off road, you go a lot slower, and you're route finding the whole time. So, so we were like, oh man, so at that point we were like, the team were like, we got to get the truck out. So I was like, Jeff, it's your project. You got to make a decision. So I was like, okay, well, I guess we got to bail. So we started to drive out, stopped our watches, stopped our tracking, and started to drive. We maybe drove 10 minutes, and which would only be, maybe a mile. And it just cleared up all of a sudden. Not cleared up, but just quit raining. And we were like, oh man, And so we stopped the truck. I was like, I don't want to give up on this project, but there is no roads to get in, and we didn't have support. So we were like, well, where are we going to get in? My buddy Jeremy, who was kind of logistics and driver and maps, he was like, the only place was this boat launch, and it was like a 10-mile gravel road coming into a boat launch where the lake starts. And so we were like, we got to meet there. And so it was another 25 or 26 miles, and we'd gone 37 that day. So, and we'd gone 48 the day before and 29 the day before, and all this off road, right? All this like bushwhacking and like uneven footing. And we both had a little like lower leg tendonitis going on. Jesse and I did, because of all the, like, it wasn't running trails,
Right. Yeah.
And so it was just super gnarly. And we got to this point, and I was like, well, we both decided we would go for it and push on into the night. So they drove us back to the spot, dropped us off, we geared up, and we took off into the night. And they said, well, we'll meet you at the boat launch in 25 miles. And we ended up just having the gnarliest night. We bushwhacked down this slot canyon to get to the lake, it took us 3.5 hours to go 2 miles in the slot canyon. We got out, we were so fatigued. We ended up bivvying in the dirt and like making a makeshift fire because we got to the lake, and we were supposed to be able to go up the banks of the lake because the water was so high. We couldn't get the normal route.
Oh, wow.
So at that point, we've gone 60 some miles, I think 62 miles. So we've gone 100K that day, and it was like 4:30 in the morning. We hadn't slept. We were down to 4 gels, and we were just like, oh man, we can't get up where we're going to go. And we couldn't think straight at that point. Like we couldn't even do simple math. And so Jesse, he just like was the voice of reason. And he said, there's plenty of dry wood. It hadn't rained in that particular spot. And he said, let's just gather a little wood on the bank of the lake, and let's take an hour nap. It'll be daylight in like an hour and a half. Let's take a nap, and then let's assess it at first light. And I was like, perfect. Let's do that. So we made a fire. We literally just put on we had waterproof gear, so we put our hoods up, laid in the dirt, crashed out for an hour, got up in the morning, pumped some water, and assessed how much food we had. That's how we found out we had 4 gels left, and split the 2 gels each, and then took off for the boat launch, which is 3 miles up the canyon. And the team we were in contact with the whole time, we had DeLorme inReach satellite devices that we could text each other back and forth.
Yeah.
And so those things were clutch. I mean, just having those, knowing those guys knew they didn't have to send any emergency people after us. They knew exactly what we were doing. We just said, hey, we're going to take a nap and then start at first light. We'll text you again when we start. And, cause there's zero mobile coverage there. So you got to have like a satellite something. We ended up, basically what we ended up doing is 142 miles in 4 days. And because we had to be back, we had schedules, and one of the photographers had to fly to Asia, like right after. And so we had to be back in Bend by Friday night. And this was like midday Friday when we finally stumbled into camp, or almost, it was like late morning and with no sleep. And so we just decided to bag it and call it and say, hey, sometimes you get into adventures that you bite off more than you can chew. And that was one of those things. The Wahi was a little wilder than we anticipated. When you're an ultra runner and run 100 milers, you go 172 miles in 4 days. That should be easy, and we should be able to knock that out. No problem. But when it's off trail and you're bushwhacking and trying to find routes in the middle of the night, and a storm comes in and messes up your plan, sometimes you got to like roll with it, and sometimes things don't go according to plan. And it was a great adventure just the same.
Yeah, no, it sounds it. That sounds awesome. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for your time today and in the last episode. I really appreciate you sharing these adventures with us. I know the audience will really like it, and also all the coaching tips and everything is going to be, really helpful and educational. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Intelligent Racer Podcast. For more information on this and other episodes, please visit www.intelligentracer.com. Also, be sure to check us out on social media, and please review us on your podcast directory. Join us next time for another edition of the Intelligent Racer.